Hey guys, welcome to Mrs. G's Sewing Space. Today we are doing an elastic waist skirt. I'm showing you how I drafted one for my daughter. I have a prior skirt video I'll pop up in the iCard section of an elastic waist skirt that I did earlier. But this one is for more precise measurements of one. And for this, you're going to need three measurements. You're going to need the measurement for around the person's waist. Then you're also going to need the measurement around the hip, which goes around your hips and the curviest part of your butt. The last measurement you need is the length of the skirt. So from your waist to however long you want your skirt is the measurement that you would use for that. So I'm going to fill in this with my daughter's measurements. She's still young. So she has a 20-inch waist, which I divided in half, and I added an inch to it. So that inch gives me a seam allowance. And then around the hip would be the same. We're dividing it in half because we only have two pattern pieces. We have our front and the back. If we had 4 pieces, there is 2 front pieces and 2 back pieces, then we would divide by 4. So using my measurements that I have written down, I'm going to now draw out my pattern. The mark I am making there is the around the hip measurement. So that would be on a piece of fabric, that would be 11 inches. The top edge of my piece of paper would be the fold. So I would take my fabric, I would fold it in half, and then from that fold I would mark out my around the hip measurement that's divided in half. So that would be 11 inches. The line that I've drawn, I call it the skirt length, but that's a baseline for me to mark the rest of my drafting on. So right now I'm marking the around the hip measurement, so from the edge of the paper to that baseline. Now I'm marking the length of my skirt, the actual length of my skirt. At this point, those dotted lines are going to represent the top of the waistband. So when the skirt is finished, that would be the top of the waistband. Okay, now I am marking an inch up from the top of the waistband, and then I'm marking an extra ½ inch for a seam allowance. So that is going to be the fold over for my waistband casing. And that ½ inch is my seam allowance. So that ½ inch gets folded down and ironed, and a ½ inch from the top, and then it gets folded down an inch, so that allows us to have our casing, and then that dotted line becomes our top of the actual waistband of the skirt. Now, like I said earlier, the top edge of that paper represents the fold of our fabric. So now we're going to go in. Oh, and there I am marking my actual skirt length from that point at the top to the point on the bottom. So our waistband casing needs to be as wide as your elastic and a smidge more. You need to be able to get your elastic through that tunnel of fabric without any problems. And then your seam allowance on the top. Now I usually do about ½ inch or ¼ inch depending on what I'm doing. But for beginners I would recommend a ½ inch. So now we're going to go down to the bottom side of the skirt. So that dotted line that I'm drawing is going to be the bottom edge of the skirt. So now I'm drawing the line that represents the hem, and then the extra little bit there, another ½ inch, would be the seam allowance. So just like for my casing, I will then fold up a ½ inch at the bottom and then fold up an inch at the bottom, and that would be my hem. So it's exactly the same as a waistband casing, except that we're not putting any type of elastic in the bottom. That just folds up and hides all of our raw cut edges. Usually on an elastic waist skirt, you work with your around the hip measurement and your skirt length. In this particular one, I wanted to take a little bit out of the waistband casing and put a curve to the hip to allow the skirt to fit a bit better on the body of my daughter. Even though she has no curves yet, I still didn't want the bulk in the waistband. So I took off a 1/2 inch on each side seam, which would make it an inch on each piece, the front and the back piece. And because she has no curves, I didn't add a seam allowance. However, if you're an adult, you would need to add a seam allowance on this side of the pattern. Not the folded side, but the cut side.
Dum, 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 dum.